Welcome back to my den. Okay, after you looked at that review of factoring the perfect squares, that should help you with this overall lesson that we're learning this week of factoring by completing the square. So previously, we've been factoring quadratic equations by finding the two factors of this end number, which we would call C. So this is A, this is B, and this is C. If we find the factors of C, the two numbers that multiply up to be C, and add or subtract up to be B. Well, sometimes that doesn't work out. Because if I thought about the factors of -1, the factors of -1 are 1 and -1. Well, those don't add up to be -4. Those cancel out and add up to be 0. So that doesn't work. And so I couldn't factor it the traditional way. So what we're going to talk about is, and you've been watching your Khan Academy videos, what we're talking about is how to use factoring by completing the square. It's a handy dandy, nifty little way to factor when it doesn't work out the normal way. Now this problem in particular would work out the normal way, but we're going to use by completing the square. If it worked out the normal way, the factors of 21 that would add up to be -10 are 7 and 3. 21, because we have 7 and 3. So if we had a -7 and a -3, that would work out beautifully. So we already kind of know the answer, but I just want to show you, teach you the way to do it by completing the square, because there are a lot of times where you don't run into this, how it works out nice and neat. Okay, so this is what you do first. You take this, which is your C, and you're going to move it over here to the other side of the equation. And how do we move it to the other side of the equation? Well, he's positive here, so we're just going to undo it with subtracting him. So now we have x squared plus, minus 10x, and then I'm going to leave a space in here where this is 0. I'm going to leave a space, and then I'm going to say equals -21. Okay, so remember, this is A. The A is this understood invisible 1, not the x squared. The A is the coefficient. This coefficient is B, and this coefficient is C. So we took the C and we moved him over here. So now C is over here. So we're left with A here and B here. So what you do is we are going to make this equation on this side of the equation into one of those quadratics. It's the perfect square. And all you have to do in order to do that is take half of B. So here's my B, which is -10. What is half of -10? Half of -10 is -5. -10 divided by 2 is -5. And then you take that half and you square it. What is -5 squared? Well, -5 times -5 is a positive 25. And you take that 25 and you add it right here. So take half of B and square it. If you need to stop the video, pause it and write that down. So you take half of B, then square it. That is terrible. Mrs. Job. Then square it. So if you need to pause and write that down, half of B and then square it. And I'm going to add it to this side. Well, guess what I'm going to also do? Whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other. So I have to add the 25 on that side too. This is all in your workbook, by the way. It tells you step by step exactly what to do. But I just want to explain it, you know, Miss Job style. Okay. So I added it to this side. Of course, I had to add it to that side. And then I end up, so anyway, just a little tip. This is always going to be positive, because anytime you take half, it's going to be, if it's positive or negative, it's always going to end up multiplying out to be a positive. So this will always be a positive, and then you add that positive over there. So now I have a handy dandy little quadratic expression that is a perfect square that we talked about in the video before that, where this is a perfect square and this is a perfect square, which makes it really easy to factor, because I'm going to know that they're just going to be twinsies. X plus 5, I'm sorry, not X plus 5. X minus 5 and X minus 5. Why do I know that? Because two factors of 25 are 5 and 5 that add up to be a -10 is -5. So X minus 5, X minus 5 equals, what's 25 minus 21? 4. And then I'm going to simplify this and just say X minus 5 squared equals 4. So now I just took these two and I smushed them together in this little expression. And then remember, the way to get rid of this squared thing is to undo it with taking the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides, which all that radical does is take off the parentheses and take off this squared. X minus 5. And then I have square root of 4. Well, we know square root of 4 is plus or minus 2. It could be a positive 2. It could be a negative 2. And then now I'm going to have two equations to set up. Because remember, anytime you have a quadratic, this squared, you're going to have two answers. So I set up my two equations. And I'm going to do it over here. I have x minus 5 equals positive 2. And I have x minus 5 equals negative 2. And then I just add my 5 to both sides to solve this one. And I end up with x equals 7. And I'm going to add my 5 to both sides, and I get x equals 3, because 5 minus 2 is 3. So these are my two answers, because remember, you're looking for two answers anytime you solve a quadratic equation. So my two answers are x equals 7 and x equals 3. Let me do one more example, and you feel free to pause it. And I want to show you just real quick a trick into finding this thing right here. See where I found x minus 5, so you don't even have to think. Remember when we took half of negative 10 and we found negative 5? Guess what? That's going to be the guy that goes here. Well, once you find half of b, before you square it, but we have to square it to know to add 25 here and here. But you could also take that negative 5. When you take half of b, you know that's going to go right here. And that might help you if you can think that far ahead. Think, oh yeah, half of whatever b is going to be what goes in those little parentheses when I factor it. All right, one more example. X squared minus 6x plus 4 equals 0. So this is one of those examples where it's not going to work out. I couldn't just open up my parentheses, because the factors of 4 are either 4 or 1. Well, 4 and 1 don't add up to be 6. Or 2 and 2. Well, 2 and 2 don't add up to be 6. So now I have to say, I got to complete the square. So remember, this is A, this is B, and this is C. Okay, so now I'm going to move C over here. And how I'm going to move C? Well, he's positive, so I'm going to subtract him from both sides of the equation. So now I have x squared minus 6x, leave a gap, equals negative 4. I'm going to leave that gap where C goes. And then to find what C is, and remember he's going to be positive, to find what C is, I take half of B, so half of 6 is 3. Oh, remember, it's negative 3. And remember, I already told you, oh, there's my answer. And then I'm going to take this negative 3 and I'm going to square it. Well, negative 3 squared is 9. So I know I'm going to add my 9 to this side of the equation and to this side of the equation. So now I already factored it because remember I told you the shortcut. If the shortcut confuses you, don't worry about it. You can also just tell yourself, oh, that's a perfect, by completing the square, that means you're making a perfect square equation on this side of the equal sign. It means that's what I'm doing in order to factor it and make that perfect square. So I have a perfect square here, perfect square here. I know it's going to be negative because this guy's negative. So I'm going to have x minus something and x minus something. Well, the square root of 9 is 3. You see how that's the same thing as negative 3 there? Anyway, and then I have equals, and I can't forget this side of the equation. 9 minus 4 is 5. Then if I squish these two together because they're Twinkies, it's x minus 3 squared equals 5. Well, how do I get rid of this squared? I have to take the square root of both sides, and that radical just removes the parentheses and the square, and I get square root of 5 because 5 is not a perfect square. It's plus or minus the square root of 5 because I don't know what the square root of 5 is, nor do I care. So then I set up my two equations. X minus 2 equals square root of 5. X minus 2, whoa, that's bad. X minus 2 equals the square root of negative 5. Negative on the outside. So I'm going to add my 2 to both sides. So now my answer is going to be x equals, square root of 5 plus 2. That's as good as I'm going to get. I think even in the workbook they say that. Yep. Oh, did I say? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm screwing everybody up. That's a 3. That should be a 3. I don't know where I got that 2 from. I'm sorry. I know y'all are thinking, Miss Job, that should have been a 3. And that should be a 3. X minus 3. Okay, so there's your first answer. X equals square root of 5 minus 3. And then, or plus 3. And then I'm going to add 3 to both sides here, and I get x equals negative square root of 5 plus 3. And those are my two answers. Okay, so hopefully I didn't confuse you too much there. But if you get confused, watch those videos again, watch this video again, look in your workbook on page 180 and look at those examples. Those are examples I just worked here. And all you have to do is remember, take that C, move it to the other side. Take half of B and square it to make this guy. Add it to both sides. Then you're going to factor it because you know you've made a handy dandy perfect square by doing that. So factor it. So you're going to get twins. And then smush those twins together. And then the only way to solve it is to take the square root of both sides, and then there you have it. Remember, you're going to have two answers, always two answers. So stop this video, rewatch it, whatever you got to do, and hopefully you get it. If not, pan me.